Welcome to the MUNA webinar, the Model United Nations Assembly webinar. Before we start, I'd obviously like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm speaking from today, as well as the land that each of you are participating from today on this webinar, and I pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. Thank you for joining this webinar this morning. My name is Robert. You'll also be hearing from Di and Judy very soon on this webinar. We are part of the Rotary team that is presenting this Model United Nations Assembly, and we're really looking forward to having you involved in it. This webinar is designed to help to prepare you for the big day, and we'll be going through the detail of the resolutions that you'll be debating and just give you some tips on how to prepare for them. If you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box and we'll get to those throughout the webinar, and we'll have time for questions at the end as well. So this event is called the Model United Nations Assembly, but I already did. I referred to it as MUNA. I'm going to be referring to it as MUNA throughout the webinar. It's just easier to do it that way. Model United Nations Assembly is a bit of a mouthful. And also letting you know that this webinar is being recorded and that we will make the slides and the recording available to you afterwards. So there's no need to try and write everything down currently. So why participate in MUNA? We hope you'll learn about other countries and cultures and about how the UN works and improve public speaking skills. And most importantly, we want you to have fun. That's what MUNA's about. Now, everyone will have been emailed a preparation document. This document has all the info you need to get started on MUNA. If you haven't received that document, please let me know and I'll send it out to you again. And obviously, this document has a lot of information in it, but make sure you pay attention to things like the rules of the debating procedure, which you obviously need to do when you're at MUNA. When we are debating at MUNA, there is a speaking order. Each resolution will have a sponsor and a seconder, and I'll talk about these. So when we go through the resolutions in this webinar today, try and think about whether your country would be for or against that particular resolution, because you'll have to debate either for it or against it. If your country feels particularly strongly for the resolution, you might consider being the resolution sponsor or the seconder, and that is the person that is that is the country that is really promoting this resolution at the UN and trying to convince other countries to support it. The resolution sponsor starts the debate and they speak for 5 minutes. Then the seconder speaks for 3 minutes. And then after that, we'll have the first against. If your country is really opposed to this resolution, maybe you think this resolution is targeting your country to get them to do something that you don't want to do, then you might want to be the first against speaker. The first against speaker has 5 minutes as well. And then all other countries that want to speak in the debate will have 3 minutes each. Then afterwards, we'll have a first against right of reply, and we'll have a sponsor's right of reply as well. Those are optional rebuttals at the end. Now, as we're going through the resolutions today, try and think about whether your country should be for or against each resolution. And if you do want to be a sponsor or a seconder or a first against, if you want to have one of those slots, then we'll ask you to complete this form at the end of the webinar. This just lets you know that this lets us know that you're nominating for one of those positions. The form will close on Friday, the 4th of August, and then we'll let you know who we think will be a sponsor and first against after that. So now we're going to go through each of the resolutions in detail. We're going to present to you the background of each resolution, and this is sort of the rationale that the sponsor of that resolution is putting forward at MUNA. This is why the sponsor wants to present that resolution. And then obviously you try and decide whether your country is for or against it. We'll also look at the text of the resolution. And when you do look at the text of the resolution, try and decide whether there is room for negotiation between your country and other countries, and maybe you'll even try and amend the resolution if you can convince other countries to agree with you. So this is the resolution text. It refers to it's obviously a resolution about climate change. It refers to the COP27 recommendations of reducing by 50% by 2030 and then net zero by 2050 in order to halt temperature increases to 1.5 degrees. And then it also talks about setting up a fund for less developed countries to help them deal with climate change. So when you're reading that text, think about where's there room for negotiation with other countries at MUNA. So we'll give you a little bit of, I'm sure you all know about climate change, but we'll just give you a little bit of a background for the rationale from the resolution. It's a change in weather patterns which causes an unbalance in the Earth's temperature. There are direct effects and indirect effects, which obviously will affect some of your countries very differently. The cause, we all know it's fossil fuels, carbon dioxide, deforestation, things like that. Again, think about, is your country very intensive in these practices? Are they not very intensive in these practices? Is your country overly affected or not affected by them? So again, we have some of the bigger polluters and some of the more vulnerable countries. Where does your country fit on this list, and how is that affected? We're talking about the COP27 agreement, and that's where we got the text for this resolution. And those are the recommendations from COP27, and they fed into the text of the resolution. There's various adaptation and mitigation factors. Think about, is your country doing these? So your task is to know what your country is doing on climate change. What's their position? What agreements have they made with other countries about climate change? The resolution talks about $100 billion GDP. Is your country above that? Is your country below that? Will your country be making financial contributions, or does your country need financial contributions? And then think about, would your country like to be a sponsor, or would your country like to be a first against? And where is there room for negotiation with other countries? And those are some resources that we used to put that background information together. They might be useful to you, or they might not. Whenever you look at resources, try and think, is this resource reliable? What's the opinion of the writer? What's their objective? So make sure you're consulting a wide range of resources. The second resolution we're going to be talking about is the restructure of the United Nations Security Council. So this is the resolution text. The resolution talks about how the Security Council has been a little ineffective at dealing with international crises. Have a think about what your country thinks about the structure of the United Nations Security Council. Maybe your country has a veto on the Security Council, or maybe your country has an ally with a veto on the Security Council, so your country might like that. Or maybe your country is one that is constantly frustrated by the Security Council's inability to do things. So I'll give you a little bit of background about what the Security Council is. The Security Council consists of 15 countries. There are 5 permanent members of the Security Council. That's China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And all of those 5 countries have a veto power. So any one of them can block something on the Security Council. There are 5 permanent members, they have a veto power, and there are 10 non-permanent members. And because of the veto power of the 5 permanent members, the Security Council is very limited in what it can achieve. So the proponents of this resolution will say that the Security Council is ineffective, the structure doesn't work. For example, when the Security Council tried to sanction Russia for the war in Ukraine, Russia could just veto that. and nothing happens. So is your country in favor of that structure, or is it not? The structure of the United Nations Security Council comes from the United Nations Charter, and that's proved very difficult to amend over the years. So some things for you to consider. What are your country's opinions on the ineffectiveness of the Security Council? Or maybe your country is quite happy with the arrangements of the Security Council. Is it fit for purpose? Does your country want to retain this power imbalance, or do you want to change it? And again, there's some resources for you to look at. So at MUNA, think about, is your country going to be arguing for or against? Would you like to be a sponsor, or would you like to be a seconder or a first against for the resolution? And there's some more resources. And again, do your own research onto what you think of the resources and how trustworthy and reliable they are. And so the next resolution is protection of international trade routes. And I think Di's back. So Di is going to talk about that one.
Thanks very much, Robin. So it is protection of the international trade routes, and it's a very interesting resolution. So if we just move to the next slide, Rob. It's about the United Nations Law of the Sea, which might be very unfamiliar to many of you, and I highly recommend that you delve into what that is all about. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, commonly known as UNCLOS, and declares the high seas are the common heritage of mankind and are open to all states for peaceful purposes. And there's issues with China and the US and about the South China Sea. That's a very important and crucial area for you to understand from your country's point of view. And that in The Hague, the International Tribunal ruled that China has no historical rights based on the 9-line map, which you must become familiar with, and ruled that China has, through its construction of installations and artificial islands at Mischief Reef, commonly known as Spratly Islands, without the authorization of the Philippines. And so that's a really important concept for you to understand. And so it's quite a detailed resolution, and we'll unpack it as we go further. So thanks, Rob. So in the past, we had very simple trade routes, and the one that you may be very familiar with is the Silk Route that went from the east to the west, and other areas, particularly throughout the Roman Empire. But today, the trade routes are very complex, and the image on the right shows various shipping routes on any given day around the world. So this slide shows an example of very, very complex shipping routes going through the South China Sea, and I will come back to the South China Sea and discuss it a little bit further. So the background, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which I mentioned before, and it's about territorial waters and that countries' laws apply. We also have reference to the exclusive economic zone, commonly seen as EEZ, and that the country has exclusive rights to fish, mine, drill, and extract resources from 12 miles to 200 miles in the exclusive economic zone of that country. So since the exclusive economic zone extends 200 nautical miles, then you can get quite tight and complex areas where there are conflicts over areas that they can gain resources from. So the background of the South China Sea, it has many countries close to each other, and there are lots of resources for extraction in the South China Sea. So the exclusive economic zones are really difficult to determine. Now, China claims that it owns the Spratly Islands on this map, and so has drawn the 9 dash line to argue that China considers its exclusive economic zone to be the entire South China Sea. So, looking at the countries that are bordering on the South China Sea, you can see that this is a very contentious stance. And so from your country's point of view, if you happen to be one of those countries within that area, you need to know what the impact will have on you. It is also a major trading route. So China is not the only one. There are lots of overlapping claims from various countries. China is claiming the red dotted line. Indonesia claims the green line. And Vietnam is claiming the big blue line. And the Philippines, the light blue line, and Brunei, the yellow line, and they all overlap each other. So there's real global trade bottleneck points, and the question is, should they be militarized? Now, I just want to spend a little moment talking about 2 key areas, the Strait of Malacca and the Suez Canal. So there's a bit of history there with the Strait of Malacca for you to get an understanding of just how much trade goes through there. There's more than 83,000 vessels that travel through the Strait of Malacca each year, connecting India, Indonesia, China, Japan, Malaysia, Singapore, and other major Asian producers. And it's a critical shipping route for bringing oil and natural gas around the world. So even if your country is not bordering the South China Sea, you will be impacted at some point through trade restrictions or impacts. And the other one I wanted to just mention was the Suez Canal. Now, the world learned a lot about the Suez Canal when the vessel Ever Given was accidentally lodged for more than 6 days and blocked shipping traffic and caused problems for global logistics. So the Suez Canal provides the shortest sea link between Europe and Asia, and roughly 12% of the annual world trade flows through the Suez Canal. So while the Ever Given was stuck, estimates found that the stranded ship held up an estimated $9.6 billion of trade each day. And it's a major shipping route for oil from the Middle East, as well as petroleum, coal, metals, wood, and fertilizer. So these major shipping routes will have huge impacts if they are militarized, and if China continues its very bold stance in the South China Sea. So the background, severing the trade routes means that civilians of member states who are not at war risk paying high price for military actions taken by other nations. It's really the increased population, increased demand for goods and services, and the increased reliance on just-in-time ordering of supplies have all reacted to the global marketplace. And there's also another aspect of this, is the breaching of treaties to which they've signed up to. And some member states, I will mention China and the UN, the US, who have different views on how treaties should be enacted or not enacted, which many others have signed. So there's a bit of background there. It's quite detailed, and I recommend that you delve into aspects of the background, particularly the Geneva Convention and the rules of war, and what the understandings of those are, and that there are representatives of aid groups that say there's a growing disregard for these rules in conflict zones around the world. And so there've been multiple instances of state non-compliance with UNCLOS, and so there's a lot of issues happening around the international trade routes. So considerations. Really the key point there is the unstable international economic conditions, the international competition, and the competitive advantages being sought in trade relationships. There's also the membership and effectiveness of trading blocks. So it's really important for you to understand what trading block your country is involved with and what the impact is on your country for the membership of that trading block. There's also black swan events that have happened, and two that you might be familiar with was the 2008 global financial crisis, and also the 9/11 bombing in New York, and how that was an unexpected event and it had unpredictable but very severe consequences for the global community. And we've also now got member nation states who are increasingly tending towards political extremes, and we're seeing a rise of right-wing extremist incidents in different countries, more recently in New Zealand with the shooting in the 2 mosques, and we've also seen it in Hungary with the rise of the governments leaning towards right-wing political views. So your task is to identify your country's trade and exposure to trade embargoes, sanctions, restrictions. Has your country signed the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS? Has your country ratified the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea? Do you rely on importing essential items such as fuel, food, water by the sea? And if there's issues with the trade routes, how does your country survive? Does your country have plans to be self-reliant? How is your country ensuring trade routes remain open? Can other countries help you keep trade routes open? Can you help other countries? What rules should exist to safeguard international trade routes? And the last one, will your country be in favour or against the resolution? Will your country be a sponsor or first against? Is there room for negotiation, and what compromises can be made? And the final slide is just a list of resources. If you just firstly, find out where your country trades and understand the impact of the UN Conference of the Law of the Sea, and just the trading partners for your country, I think you'll find a wealth of information. There's lots of data and graphs from the UN. They've got various departments that will cover the international trade routes resolution. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks for that, Di. That was excellent. So our final resolution is on social media regulation. So this is the text of the resolution. It's very detailed, but what it's getting at is it's talking about a proposed law that the Australian government had previously suggested about social media regulation, and this resolution is exploring whether the UN should get other UN member states to take similar action. This resolution is about whether social media should be regulated or unregulated, and if it is unregulated, what are the consequences of that for individuals, our private information, what safeguards exist for elections or democracy if social media becomes compromised, and even national security implications as well. So in the past, countries could only be invaded physically. It was loud and overt. Everyone knew it was happening. Today, we might not know when we're being invaded. It will happen silently. Think of the Medibank hacks that happened a few months ago. So some countries do have laws which try and regulate social media, such as Section 230 in the United States. You might want to have a look at that and become familiar with that. But all laws that countries do try to implement to regulate social media are not perfect, and there's always gaps that exist. So countries also have laws that protect against hate speech or cyberbullying, abuse, terrorism, etc. And every country does these laws differently. Some of them are listed here, but I'd encourage you to research how your country does it and what cooperation your country does with other countries to try and address issues in these areas. So these are some considerations for you to think about, and they get it sort of how social media has changed over the years and how our interaction with it changes it. Is our life controlled by social media now? Do we give it too much information? And does that compromise our safety in various ways? So your task, maybe find out, has your country interfered in an election? What does your country think about social media regulation? Would your country's population be in favour of social media regulation, or would they prefer a more open approach? Has your government ratified various treaties in this area? And again, what cooperation exists with other countries? And again, here are some resources that you might want to look at. And in particular, for the social media resolution, you'll have to think about the reliability of each resource. What's the opinion of the writer? What's their objective? So that's all of the resolutions that we have. I'm going to go back to Di, and she's going to talk about the adjudication that happens at MUNA, because if you've read the preparation book, you'll know that there are some prizes on offer at MUNA, and Di's going to talk about how the adjudicators will judge those. Over to you, Di. You might have to unmute yourself, Di.
Sorry, Rob. We were hoping to have Judy Lyons as our lead adjudicator to speak to you all about adjudication, but I have done adjudication in the past, so I'm quite familiar with what the panel will be looking for. There are 3 adjudicators, possibly a 4th, but some of the things that we'll be looking for is how well you've taken on board your country's position. And so we will be wanting to hear the points from your country, and the presentation needs to be very clear and it needs to be concise and spoken with some passion as well. We don't want people just reading from their notes. We want a bit of passion in there so that you really are acting as an ambassador for the country, the UN country that you are representing. Now, the other thing that we're really looking forward to seeing is good teamwork and how the speaking is shared between the delegation. You'll have one person standing at a time speaking, but you can share that between you, and that can work really effectively. And so you can see that you've both been very, very involved in the presentation of the information from your country's point of view. We need to see that you're being actively involved in the proceedings. So Rob was talking about whether or not you would be taking the initial role of first or second for and against. So we would be hoping that you would be considering those positions as well to open up the debate. And there are also debating rules, which I know Rob has included in the booklet. Be very familiar with those, please. And also be very familiar with how you address the Secretary General and the etiquette used within the General Assembly. That is really important to follow those. And the other way to really be noticed is to build alliances with other countries. Now, that can be through your presentations or your rebuttal, but it also can be through your diplomatic notes. And I think there will be opportunities for block meetings to meet and build those alliances with other countries so that you can be seen to be actively involved in the debate. So the key point down the bottom, it's better to make 1 or 2 arguments well instead of making several arguments poorly. So find what it is that is really crucial to your country, and what you are able to develop into an argument, a very strong argument, and predict what the responses might be from other countries. Be aware of who's in what block with you, and who your potential enemies are, if I can use that word, the countries that will have issues that will not always be in agreement with you. But the main thing is to work well together, to be an excellent representative of the country that you are an ambassador for in MUNA. So I think that's all I need to say, Rob.
Excellent, thank you, Di. That was lovely. So that brings us to the end of this section of the webinar. We'll open it up to questions now. I've had one question come through already, which I'll get to in a sec. So please type your questions in the box and we'll get to it. Otherwise, it's the MUNA is on Saturday, 19th of August at Berwick. We ask you to arrive around 8:30 so that we can start at 9. If you do have any questions, put them in the box. So the first question is about how do we pick the sponsors and seconders and first against for the resolutions. We don't do it on a strictly first come first serve basis. We will look at is this an appropriate country to be sponsoring this resolution, and we'll also look at if your country is put your hand up for sponsoring all 4 resolutions and another country only wants to sponsor 1, then we might try and make it equitable and share the load around so that other countries do have an opportunity. Yeah, but otherwise, if you are really keen and you get in early, we will take that into consideration. The only reason I've set the deadline is to the end of which is Friday, 2 weeks away. That's so that you can have time to discuss that with your team and really sort of formulate a position on each of the resolutions. Just to give you that time to do that. Did you have anything to say on that, Di?
No, I was just wanting to encourage the delegations to go back into the booklet and read about the diplomatic notes, and to be very aware of how they get a speaking position, that they must, if they're not doing the initial opening of the resolution debate, if they're not first or second or against, they need to put their request for speaking either for or against in a diplomatic note and send it to the Secretary General. So that's what we've found in the past, that the delegations are not familiar with that process, and in the first resolution they've lost an advantage that they could have had. So just about the diplomatic notes and knowing how to use them effectively, and that they all need to be in the spirit of MUNA, and they need to be respectful. Sometimes people can get very passionate with their views, and it can, verge on being a little bit difficult, and that they're not frivolous, and that they are collected by diplomatic couriers who will be reading them. So that's just one aspect. It's also a lot of fun, and lots of bribes have happened through the diplomatic notes, accompanied by a lolly or two.
Great point, Di. So
Yep.
your country won't automatically appear on the speaking list. If you do want to speak to a resolution, you write it on the diplomatic note, you hold it up in the air like that, and then someone will come and collect it. It could be addressed to another team, or it could be addressed to the Secretary General. If you want to be put on the speaking list, you address it to the Secretary General and say, could I please be put on the speaking list? I haven't had any other questions come through.
The last point I want to make is just for delegations to really make an effort to wear the national dress of their country, and if they're not able to do that they dress in something that is respectful, and that can be a school uniform, or it could be a sort of a black skirt or black pants and a black top. So you can just do that if you're not able to get national costume. But we do encourage you to try and do that, because it does add to the spirit of Muna and it makes the assembly look really great and colourful. But don't wear anything that is disrespectful to the UN country that you are representing.
Great point, Di. It's not about disrespecting or appropriating other cultures. It's about tastefully representing what your country is. Think of what your country might wear at their formal occasions.
Yeah.
And
the last thing is that there will be a morning tea and an afternoon tea, and we will provide lunch for you. So, and water will be on hand as well. And we will have some lollies on your table to give you some sugar hits to help keep you going through the day.
Absolutely. And on that note, there's we do encourage you to invite your parents and teachers and friends to come along and watch. It's in the auditorium at Nossal, so there'll be a live audience, plenty of space and plenty of food as well.
And the really great part is the flag ceremony. So make sure that you enjoy that part of the Muna event.
So there has been a question, Di. Do you have any recommendations for where we can source our national dress from?
I would be seeking help from your local Rotary Club that is sponsoring you. They may have contacts that you don't know about. So I would be asking the Rotary Club. I'd also ask through your school and see if there's some connections within that community for borrowing some sort of national costume, and contacting other community groups that might be involved in that particular community as well.
Excellent. Last chance to get your questions in, because I think we've covered everything, Di.
I think so. I just hope everybody has a great time, that they put their heart and soul into it, because it is a great experience. And as Rob said, we have 2 perpetual shields, we have awards, we have about 6 awards to hand out, and there is money attached to those.
Prizes.
Yeah, cash prizes, and it's so your effort is really acknowledged, and it's a great day. I've been involved in Muna for 12 years, and it really is such a fun event. But you've got to be in that space to go in with the attitude that it will be. It's very nerve-wracking for many, but they really grow during the day. As each resolution goes through, you'll find that there'll be a lot of passion coming into the United Nations space in the General Assembly, and that you will form really great alliances with other countries, and that there's a lot of laughter as well throughout the debating.
Excellent. So I think we might wrap it up there, Di. There hasn't been any other questions. So we will send an email out tomorrow with these slides and the link to that sponsor and First Against poll or questionnaire. If you do have any questions, email us. We'll reply quickly. We want you to have the best experience possible, and we're here to assist with that.
Yeah. And just probably the final point, this is Rotary Muna. There are a couple of other Munas that are floating around schools at the moment, but this is Rotary Muna, and we're very different. We run a whole day focused on a broader experience in Muna. So, when people say, oh, which Muna are you? It is the Rotary Muna, because it's a Rotary organisation with 2 districts, District 9810 and District 9820, coming together to provide this amazing Rotary Youth Program event.
Fantastic. All right. Goodbye, everyone. We'll see you on Saturday the 19th.
Okay. Bye.
Oh, hang on. We've had one question. Oh, it's just a thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you, everybody.
Bye.